Got it. Okay, and we are going to start the webinar and get some people in here. So are you in Edinburgh at the moment?
I am in Edinburgh. Yeah, I live here.
I'm jealous. So the funny thing about that is, as we welcome people in, we're going to do a little welcome in a second. But yeah, the funny thing is, you just showed us your cats, and when I last time I was in Edinburgh, our joke was that all the cats we saw were all the cats that were in Edinburgh. So we saw 3, possibly 4. So that's been the joke. Wow, look at all of these wonderful attendees. This is so exciting. Welcome, everybody.
Excited.
Hi, welcome. Okay, well, let's get this started because we have a lot of attendees. This is so cool. Okay, welcome virtually to Syosset Library. My name is Jessica. I am one of your hosts. My librarian host is
Megan.
And we are really excited to have virtual lunch or brunch or dinner or wherever you are in the world with Victoria Schwab, who has written Gallant and the Darkest Shades of Magic books and all of them. Wonderful stuff. However, before we get going, just a few housekeeping rules. Number 1, this event is in webinar mode. So the only people who can share screens and mics are me, Megan, and Victoria. We do encourage Q&A through chat or Q&A function. Megan and myself will address your Q&A to Victoria as it goes. However, it is really important to mention that this is a safe space and a fun, friendly event. So while we do welcome audience participation, keep it friendly and keep it nice. Any semblance of racism, hate speech, abusive language will have you booted from the webinar, which will be a complete shame because we have an hour with Victoria Schwab to talk to her about her books. So Megan, anything to add before we turn the mic over?
I think you said everything great, and I'm just so excited to get talking with Victoria. This is so exciting.
All right, I am going to put the spotlight on you and give you a chance to talk a little bit about Gallant, and then we will welcome some audience Q&A.
Awesome. So hi, I'm V.E. Schwab, also go by Victoria, and my latest novel, Gallant, is a standalone. It's the story of Olivia Pryor, a teenage girl who has spent the vast majority of her life in an orphanage, knowing nothing of her family, having nothing of her family, except for a journal that has entries from her mother that seem to devolve into madness and illustrations that make no sense. And at the back of the journal, though, is a letter, a perfectly lucid letter from Olivia's mother to Olivia, warning her that she will be safe so long as she stays away from Gallant. Now, for years, Olivia has no idea what this means. Gallant is just a word without context until one day she receives a letter from an uncle she's never met, inviting her to come home to the family estate, which is called Gallant. Olivia gets there, finds no uncle, a house falling into disrepair, a garden being strangled by strange dead weeds, and a wall at the back of the estate with a locked door that seems to lead nowhere. So I've often described the book as The Secret Garden meets Crimson Peak. It is, I think that kind of sums it up. It's about family, and it's about home, and it's about finding your place in the world and finding your voice in it as well.
Thank you so much for that. Before we, while the audience is getting warmed up, Megan, do you have any questions to get us started?
Yeah, so as I was reading this book, I just love the atmosphere you created. It just was just a wonderful, like, Gallant. The house itself is its own character in itself. Can you talk a little bit about that? Did you have a place that inspired you for the setting?
So interestingly, I think that setting is, if not the main character in all of my books, it's the first character. I do feel like setting should feel like a personality, like a character. And I think that's because I think my biggest pet peeve as a reader is when characters don't feel inextricable from place. Like, we are so much a product of where we come from and where we are and how we move through the world. And so I want to make sure that whether I'm writing characters who fit cleanly into their space or characters who don't feel at home in their space, place is such a vital thing. I mean, we're having this conversation. I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland right now, where I live. Like, place is deeply, deeply important to me. So for me, this novel actually started with the estate, with Gallant. And it specifically started with the garden wall. I described it in my little kind of opening pitch, which is that at the back of the Gallant estate, there is a wall. But the thing about walls is they only really work when they're keeping something out or in. But this is not a full wall around the property. This is just a piece of wall at the back of the property. And if you can walk all the way around this wall, then the question becomes, why is there a locked door? Like, what is that for? And so that was really kind of the thing that got in my head, the thing I spent years looking at this proverbial wall and this proverbial door, wondering where it led. And for a really long time, I assumed I was telling a fairy tale, right? You know, here is the here and the there, the domestic and the wild. So the thing beyond the wall must be kind of a fey space. I thought I was going to have a forest. I thought it was going to have all those kinds of fairy tale trappings. And then one day I realized, oh, I'm not writing a fairy tale. I'm writing a death tale. I'm writing an underworld tale. And that's when the things on both sides of the wall finally kind of came together for me. But everything about this story is completely rooted in that sense of place.
We have so many questions coming.
They're piling in right now.
Yeah. Megan, do you want to get the first one and we'll just kind of go back and forth?
Sure. Yeah, let me go back here.
Elijah, I think, was the first question.
Yes, Elijah says, where did the inspiration come for Gallant? You touched on this a little bit. I've got it on my desk now and I'm so excited to start it.
So in addition to the place, right, to Gallant as a physical space, and I think, you know, so I write fantasy novels, but I write fantasy novels that are grounded in reality as a point of departure. I always like to say I grew up wanting the world to be stranger than it was, right? And that meant that I grew up wanting to not have magic be something that I could only access through a book. I like, you know, like Lord of the Rings, you pick it up, the only time you'll ever get to go to Middle Earth is through the pages of that book. But like Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, there you access like the second city, the underneath city from our world. And I think that like that proximity of magic is so important to me. It's what excites me. And so I definitely think that because of that, when I sit down to write a story, I start with the question, what if? And that seems really simple, but if you think about what if means, when you start a question, what if, what you're saying is, what if our world was like our world, but different? You're not starting from wholesale, from whole cloth. Like I like to like set myself in reality and then create a point of departure. So that happened with Gallant and the doorway. And that was a major desire that I had, was to kind of root this fairy tale, this death tale in our world and create a physical doorway, a physical point of departure. In addition, though, I wanted to tell a story about voice. Olivia Pryor, the main character, is nonverbal. And as an author, like we have many defaults. We have things which we rely on in our writing, and dialogue is something we rely on really heavily, but dialogue is one manifestation of voice. It's a spoken voice. And I really wanted to explore the other manifestations, the other ways that we communicate, and what happens when those communication lines are shut down or broken, right? How isolating it is, how lonely it is to not be understood and to not be able to make yourself understood. I think especially for a teenage girl, I grew up, and at that time in my life, I just felt like I didn't have the vocabulary to convey what I was feeling and who I was. And so I really wanted to explore the loneliness that comes from having people believe that not spoken means silent. And so that was the other kind of driving force. And then, like I say, it's a death tale. So I wanted to explore the line between life and death, but I always want to make that boundary really porous. I want to make it feel like a two-way street in all my books. And so those were kind of the main inspirations.
The next question is from Hannah. What is the greatest thing you learned from writing Gallant?
I think I learned something from all of my books, but it's usually like a thing I learn about myself. I think every time I write a novel, so I write for like middle grade, YA, adult, and then Gallant is actually my first all ages read, meaning that like it's not designed to be for any one audience, but it has a teenage protagonist. And so anytime I write about teenage protagonists, I'm really writing for a version of myself. So that means that like while I'm writing Addie Larue for present day me, at the time I was writing Addie Larue, I was 30, writing Gallant, I'm looking back to 16-year-old me. And so often what happens when I'm writing those novels is like a lot of deep exploration of who I was and what I actually lacked and was unable to articulate. But now, like as a 34-year-old, I'm like finding the articulation for a thing I couldn't say. Right. And so like it's really interesting looking back at that age from where I am now is like I was really deeply closeted, but I was like closeted to myself. Like I did not have the terms for what I was going through. It wasn't just that I was hiding it. And so that's where that lack of voice, that searching for communication, feeling like alone in this house, in this space. I've never been a big fan of horror as a consumer because I'm so easily scared. But I've found that I really love writing things with horror elements to them. And I think it's because twofold. One is like the thing that makes horror frightening is the unknown. And when you're the creator, you know. So you're creating fear for someone else, but you're not like you're in control of it. The other thing is it really got me, writing this book got me to explore horror as a genre and like really discover that when you take away the jump scares, what you're really left with is like the physical space of a horror, either novel or show or film, is like almost a mirror of your internal landscape. Like it becomes almost all a metaphor. It becomes about loneliness. It becomes about identity. It becomes about family. It becomes about fear as like these big capital letter concepts. And so looking at Gallant, the house, as kind of a mirror of Olivia's internal state. But I'm not sure I would have done that if I hadn't really gone and like sat with a lot of horror shows and novels and works that I would normally be kind of skittish about because I'm so scared of stuff like that.
Megan, do you want to take the next question? I believe it is from Emma, and we have something in the Q&A, which I will also grab.
Okay, so Emma says, I love the cadence and rhythm of Olivia's mother's journal. I'd love to hear more about how you found her particular voice.
Yeah, well, thank you. My background is in poetry, and I very rarely get to kind of bring it out in my fiction. I think, so what happened was I wrote poetry. That's like what I was, known for as a teenager and as a young adult. It's what I like went into college thinking that that was going to be my form of writing. And I never wrote fiction, mostly because I didn't think I had the capacity to hold the story that size in my head. I still don't. I'm 22 books in, and I'm like still not entirely convinced I know what I'm doing. But poetry has always had such an important role. And I think at some point in college, I realized, oh, well, what if I wrote fiction and I layered all of the things I know and love about poetry into it? So I applied the rules of fiction, of poetry to my prose, which is why I think a lot of my books have a rhythm or a cadence to them. But every now and then I get to bring poetry to the forefront. I got to do it in Our Dark Duet, one of my YA novels where a monster has a point of view and it's told in freeform poetry. And then in this, I really looked at the entries from Olivia's mother as if they were poems, as if every word had this weight and this duality of meaning. Because that's, I mean, a lot of poetry, it's interesting. Like a lot of poetry can read like madness. If you don't get it, if you're not connecting with it, it can feel like a puzzle that you don't have like the cipher for. And so I really wanted to explore Olivia's mother, what Olivia assumes to be a kind of madness, and take it and write it as if it was completely lucid, as if it was a lucid poem, and then find ways to almost fray the edges of it so that it felt a little bit more unsettled.
That's awesome. I actually I'll combine two questions because one is in the Q&A and one is in the chat. One person in the chat, Myra, wants to know, out of all your books, do you have any favorites? And Astrid in the Q&A says, hello, I loved Gallant. Olivia is a great character. Do you think you'll ever tell more of her story after the events of Gallant? I thought somehow that those questions kind of fit well together.
Sure. Gallant is a standalone. So I treat standalone novels in a very, very different way than I treat series. Like, for instance, right now I'm writing book 4 in the Shades of Magic world, and that obviously behaves in a very different way. A standalone operates in its own rules. And one of the rules that I set for standalones is that, or one of the rules I abide by, not like I made it up, is that when you finish a standalone novel, you should feel like you want more, but not that you need more. Like, you should feel like you want to stay with the characters. You shouldn't feel like you're lacking something. And it's a really fine line, but I like to leave you still wanting more. And I think with standalones, this happens with Addie and this happens with Gallant. It can feel, they're the ones I get asked the most often about, like, will you write more? And it's because I'm known usually for writing series. So when you write a standalone, there's a kind of hunger that comes with it. But it's a hunger that I embrace because I think that's what rereading is for. That's what revisiting a story is for. So no, it's not to say I won't write another book that could sit next to Gallant in that space and feel like it is part and parcel. But as far as Olivia's story, I don't think so. I'm trying to think, this is going to sound maybe like I like metaphors, so I'm going to use another metaphor, which is that, like, I think that fantasy authors, we write houses. And, like, there are some fantasy writers who write the house and then give you as the reader the keys to that house. And they say, go in and explore, see everything there is to see. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist, right? You can see everything. You live in that house now. I'm not one of those writers. Like, I like to think I build you a house and then I don't let you into the house, but I, like, part the curtains on one window and I say, like, look into this room for a little while, and based on everything you can see, infer the rest of the house, like, guess what the rest of the house looks like. And then when the story's done, the people are still in the house and still living their lives, but I've closed the curtain. I want you to feel like the characters are continuing to go about their lives, but you don't live in that house. You were just passing by that house. And that's, like, the only way I know to sum up the way that I like to end stories, which is to say I don't like to end stories at the end. I like to end stories at the end of your time with the story. But, and then the other question was about favorites. I have written I have 21 novels published. I'm almost done with 22. And it is very hard to pick favorites. I do not like to pick favorites, but I will say that not the novels I write become time capsules of the person I was while I was writing them. And not every novel makes the same demands of me. You know, I have novels that I've written in a year, and then I have something like Addie Larue. The Invisible Life of Addie Larue took almost 10 years. So you have to remember that I got the idea for the Invisible Life of Addie Larue a solid 6 months before my very first novel hit shelves. And Addie would go on to be my 20th published book. So, like, it was with me for 19 straight novels. So it's not that Addie is necessarily my favorite of the novels, but I think it took up so much of my life for so long that it will be a long time before something replaces it in terms of the weight that it had for me.
Those very good questions. We are, like, lighting up in the chat and the Q&A. Megan, do you want to take something from the chat? And I will concentrate on Q&A. We'll kind of go back and forth that way.
Okay, go ahead. Caitlin's question. Do you ever come up with really specific details or characters that you don't have a story for yet? My characters are like my children, but I haven't found home stories for them all yet. It can be frustrating. I loved Addie Larue, yes.
That can absolutely be frustrating. I think it kind of, the answer to this question really depends on the kind of writer that you ask. Like, for some writers, the story and the people in that story and all of the details come together all at once. They come, like, they're never inextricable, right? For me, to use a totally different metaphor, like, I look at a story as a meal with many ingredients in it. And, like, I assemble that meal in my head over quite a long period of time. So the ingredients get added along the way. And so in that way, like, yes, every time I have an idea for a character, it starts out as not in the pot where I'm brewing my meal. A lot of what I'm trying to do, though, is figure out the kind of story that I'm trying to tell And so the kind of people that I want to focus on in that story. So because I start with setting as kind of the base ingredient for the meal, I really like quite early on start testing the kind of character that serves the story, the kind of character that fits in the story, and the kind of character that's going to add conflict to the story. So I haven't really had an idea, except for Addie, which is a character-based novel, not a plot-based novel, because it really is the story of her identity. Instead of saying what if and following it with a world question, it's what if and followed with a character question. But in general, because I start with the setting, I kind of create the characters next instead of creating them first. So I've never really had a character drifting around in my head without a story attached to it, because by the time I create the characters, I already have a foundation of a story that I want to tell. But I also say, like, if you're stuck or if you have characters and you don't have the story for them, one of the things that I do when I'm building my characters is I ask like 3 questions. What is the character afraid of? What does the character want? And what are they willing to do to get what they want? And I think by asking those questions, you can start to find a context for that character. You can start to find a story to put that character in. So figuring out not only who your character is, and of course you have to love your character, but figure out like what point do they have? Are they your main character? Are they a side character? Are they an antagonist, a villain? Like, figure out where you are and where the story is in relation to the character.
That was great. We have a question from Savannah in the Q&A, and then Megan will take the next one in the chat after. On the note of self-expression and finding your voice through your writing, has there been a book that felt like a turning point in expressing your voice? Gallant felt like such a personal read to me, so I am wondering if writing it felt different than writing any of your other books.
Okay, so I'm smiling because the book that actually like redefined my voice and my relationship to writing was actually my 4th novel, Vicious. It's my first adult novel, and the thing that you have to understand is at the time when I wrote Vicious, everything was going badly in my career. My debut novel had come out, and it had been like a whisper in the wind, and it was taken out of print 18 months later. My next novel, the beginning of a series, had come out, and the publisher lost interest in it and basically canceled the series after book 2. By the time I got to Vicious, I had no faith in publishing. I had no faith in anything. And I had done what so many writers do early on in their careers. I had tried to guess what other people wanted to read. And it wasn't working. And so I basically was like, what is going to be my swan song? I'm going to write one more novel. And if it doesn't sell or if it doesn't work, like at least I will rediscover my love of the writing process. Because at this point, I'm like 25. I'm being told I'm washed up. I'm being told it's my fault my books aren't doing well. Like I've lost all faith. So I sat down to write a book that was just so entirely for me to help me recapture my love of writing. Like I didn't care what anyone else wanted. And because of that, I asked myself, like, what do you want to read? Like, and I was like, well, I want to read a like secret history, but with supervillains, right? Like I want to write this, like I want to read an antagonistic, like what if Professor X and Magneto were like pre-med students? I want it to be like violent and dark and like very black humor. And like, no one's ever going to buy this because I've been told already numerous times, like people won't buy super powers unless it's within comics, unless it's within established. So I already knew it was doomed. And because it was doomed, I just had fun. I had so much fun, and it served its purpose. It took about 2.5 years, and I rediscovered my love of writing. And then it sold. And even when it sold, you have to understand, it sold in a very small deal, and my editor was like, look, just so we're being honest here, I don't actually think this book is going to do very well, but I like that you tried it, and I'm excited to see what you do next. So even at the time my publisher bought it, they were like, this isn't going to sell. And it did. It took years, but it did really well. And like my entire relationship to creativity changed with that book because it was the first thing of mine to get traction, and it had been entirely written for an audience of one. And so from that moment on, whenever I sat down to write a story, I didn't think about the market. I didn't think about the broadness of appeal. I didn't think about what anyone else wanted. I just asked myself, like, what do I want to read? And then I wrote that. And what I found is the more specific I was in that, the more specific my answer, the more I thought nobody else will like this thing, the more a broader and broader audience liked that thing. So ever since Vicious, that has been my relationship to writing. And not every book has like gained the same traction. Not every book has like had quite the same breadth of appeal, but it's never gotten back to the point where I have questioned that decision.
Well, that was a great response. Like, we certainly love your book. So I'm so glad, you continued writing. So we have another question about Gallant here from Madison. Did Gallant teach you anything while you were writing it?
I mean, many things. Like a huge amount about the nonverbal community, because I did a ton of research, and then I used sensitivity readers. And for anyone who doesn't know, like, there's creative intention and there's lived experience. And like anytime that you have a creative intention, but you don't possess the lived experience of the thing that you're writing about, it's really imperative that you find sources that have that lived experience to make sure that you're doing things in an authentic and respectful way. So obviously that was a huge amount of like the education process for me. I also I think I have this fear that I write quiet, small books. And I think I just learned to embrace that. Like for many, many books, I thought, oh, my beginnings are slow. And for many, many books, I thought, oh, the story's too small, or it isn't. And I think like with Gallant, I mean, and Gallant is such a hard sell in so many ways. It's illustrated. It has like found object elements to it. It is not middle grade YA or adult. It is just like in the margins. And I like just kind of embraced that. It just embraced it for what it was. I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And I think previous incarnations of me at different points in my career would have pulled back. Like I can see all of the branches at which I could have chosen to go in an easier direction, in a more commercial direction, in a cleaner, like narrower direction. And I didn't do that. And that was itself like a massive creative trust fall. But at the same time, I'm really glad I made those choices. It doesn't make it necessarily the like most commercial or loudest read, but it is exactly what I wanted it to be.
That's awesome. We have a question in the Q&A from Ben. Hi, I loved Gallant. Finished a few days ago. When you were in the process of writing Gallant, how did you manage to clearly separate hobbies and writing? How do you generate and manage ideas for your novels?
Ooh, okay. So context, right? Context is important. I wrote Gallant in the opening months of the pandemic. I was in lockdown in my parents' tiny village in France with literally nothing to do and a book coming out, Addie, Larue, that I couldn't do anything for because everything in the world was being shut down. And I felt incredibly claustrophobic and my world felt incredibly small, as so many people can relate from having everything kind of put on hold. And so in a lot of ways, it was not an easy time to write because it was very difficult to be present in any form of creativity. But I had not sat still since the beginning of my career. Like in 2019, I was in 16 countries and I was scheduled to be in just as many in 2020 before the pandemic happened. And all of a sudden I found myself sitting incredibly still. And I think that informed Gallant, but it also created a liberty to have hobbies and to take time for myself and to take time to be present in ways that I am not always present, because I think it's difficult when you're promoting and you're traveling and you're creating. And I'm already not very good at being like 100% in the real world. And my friends and family know this. When I start drafting a book, which is almost all the time, at least 10 to 20% of my brain is always doing that thing. And so I'm not very good at minding reality. But I kind of made that decision during the pandemic to make sure I had a work-life balance. It's not a thing I've always been good at. But like and make time for it. The only way I'm going to show you, I have a habit tracker. This is how important it is to me. So this is my and I want to show it because only one of the things on this tracker is writing. So like if you see this, I'll tell you what it says because I know it's not reversed. It's showing up properly here. So like this is what I do every single day. And on here is 10,000 steps, is reading, is cardio, is self-care, is journaling, is violin, which is a thing I took up right before the pandemic. And I think it's so important to remember, if you're creative in any way, that like you have to invest that time in humaning as well as in making. I talk a lot about the creative well and how important it is to keep it full. The more creative work you do, the more imperative that is. I watch a ton of TV. I don't play video games. The only reason is I know I'd never write a book again. I'm incredibly obsessive in my pursuits, but I read 150 books a year. I watch TV and movies, and I read comics, and I listen to music, and I listen to audiobooks, and I go for walks, and I do everything I can because I want to be a good creative, because I want to be prolific, because I don't want to like interrupt my creative energy. I recognize that all of those hobbies, everything else I'm doing, that's latent storytelling, that's latent creativity and latent narrative. And so I think sometimes we need to recontextualize hobbies and downtime and other things and realize what they are, which is that they are also feeding our creative energy.
That is awesome. I love that. I have a next question from Jess. Did you start writing at a young age, and have you kept any of these stories or rewritten them into your stories now?
So like I said, I wrote poetry, but I did try my hand at a couple pieces of short fiction in the most me way possible. One of my first short stories, I think I was like 12, was about two brothers, the angel of life and the angel of death. And the angel of death got real jealous that the angel of life was getting like all the accolades. And the angel of death was super important too and wanted some attention and some credit. So he killed the angel of life. And then he didn't realize that in doing so, like everyone would die. And then he was just like alone and still didn't get the accolades. So I wrote that when I was like 12 or 13. And I think that tells you pretty much what kind of creative I was going to be. I've saved some of my poems. I know my mom has anyway. I started, like I said, I wrote poetry all through high school. I was my high school's poet laureate. And then I got to college and I started taking creative writing classes, not to major. I actually I have like no interest in creative writing as an education. Like I was just doing it because I wanted to. I started out in astrophysics, by the way, and I changed my major 6 times. So like clearly I have like a weird relationship to education, but I started out in creative writing, but at no point did I want to do lengthy fiction. I did short stories and microfiction and nonfiction and screenwriting. And then when I was 19, I realized that the reason I hadn't tried to write a novel was because I was incredibly afraid of failing to write a novel. And I have this deeply antagonistic relationship to failure. Like I had a fear of needles, so I got tattoos, and I had a fear of change, so I cut off all my hair, and I had a fear of being away from family, and so I backpacked through Europe, and I had a fear of heights, so I jumped out of an airplane. And like the day I realized I was afraid of failing to write a novel, I sat down and started writing a book just to prove myself wrong. So I wrote my first novel when I was 19, and it was terrible. And I like want to say that because I think it is imperative that your first attempt at anything be terrible. That's like breaking the seal. But I got to the end of it and I realized I was capable. And so I tried again. And like that's really where my career started. When I was a senior in college, I wrote my second novel, and that would go on to become The Near Witch, which was my first published book. And I also just want to say, for anyone who like, you might have heard me catch earlier that I said that my first novel went out of print. And this is why I want to just like talk about the long game and like not quitting, because The Near Witch came out and went out of print within 18 months. And then 6.5 years later, it was republished after Vicious and A Darker Shade of Magic and Vengeful, and it became a bestseller, right? And I didn't change a single word of that book. I didn't revise it. I didn't go back in and write it differently 10 years after the first time. Like it was just the timing. It was that by the time it came out a second time, I had this incredibly loyal following that understood that I wrote strange stories and was willing to embrace it. So understanding that like there will always be a part of the equation that is out of your control. But if you want to write, the absolute best thing you can do is keep writing. And I say this to baby writers all the time, which is that like, if your book sells, you're going to need another book. And if your book doesn't sell, you're going to need another book. And I think that has saved me so many times over the course of my career that I just am relentless. I just keep working. And so I'm always working on something because I don't know how the book I've just put out is going to do, but I know that I want to keep doing this thing.
We have a question in the Q&A from Mary. Hey, writer question. How can you tell when a story really isn't working, or if you're just using that as an excuse to avoid the hard part?
Ooh, it depends on when that feeling comes up, right? Like, so a couple of things. I'm an outliner, but I devise my endings first. And the reason that I do this is because one, it will keep me from quitting on bad days, but two, it takes the desert of first drafting and it turns it into a football field, right? A measurable distance that you need to cross. And that way, if you get stuck, you can look at the distance between where you are and where the story ends, and you can start breaking it down and say, well, like, okay, well, what's one thing that happens between here and there? And you can kind of break up the problems. But if the story's not working, or let's make it more specific, if a scene's not working, if a piece is not working, because it's usually not the whole story, you kind of have to figure out how to trust your gut. And this is why I am such a relentless consumer of stories. Because I like to think you have like this little story monster that lives behind your ribs, and you feed it. And the more you feed it, the better it gets at knowing when something is right or wrong. And so like I have fed this little story monster in my ribs so many stories so that I understand what works and what doesn't work. So that when I'm looking at the chapter or the book and I feel like something's wrong, what it is that little story monster in my chest is like, red flag, like something's not working. And so you almost have to cultivate an intuitive sense. And if you have that intuitive sense, if something in your head says like red flag, you got to learn to listen to it, and you have to be brave enough to listen to it and start backing up through the story until you find the point where you don't feel the red flag. But understand that like there's something's not working. I'll feel that a lot of times when I'm writing a chapter and it's like missing a beat. It'll be like the flow of the chapter's not right. That's like a red flag. Listen to it now, or I'm going to have to listen to it in revisions. I should just go ahead and fix it now. But also understand that sometimes like we block ourselves in stories. We feel fear of not doing it well enough. We feel stuck because we don't know what happens next. And so that's just to say, like, you have to figure out what the block is, what the shape of the block is. Is the block fear? Is the block confusion? Is the block a red flag? And that takes sitting with it and figuring out, like, why do you feel stuck? If it just feels too big or insurmountable, break it down. Break it down into like the smallest bites possible.
All right, and our next question is from Hannah. What are your inspirations for characters' names? A lot of your character names are words that could have meaning. Larue, Prior, Bart. Is that coincidence or is it random?
Oh man. You know, I talk so much about like outlining and structure and planning, and I am so wishy-washy when it comes to names. Like it's purely emotive. And like somebody asked me recently about where the name Gallant came from. And honestly, it's probably like, this is where my poetry brain kicks in. It's like 10 years ago, I heard the word and I thought, I like the way that word tastes. And then I put it in my pocket and I waited for a use for it. It's gut. And I cannot start a story until I know the characters' names. Like I know with Olivia, it probably took 18 tries, and I would rewrite a scene over and over again, swapping out Olivia's name. And every time something just would catch or it would just not feel right until I found the right name. And then I was like, oh. And I knew that there was going to be the opening of her mother's letter to her as Olivia, Olivia, Olivia. So I knew I wanted a name that when repeated 3 times, had its own kind of hill and valley cadence to it. Again, this is where the poetry part kicks in. Often though, it's just gut. I'll like put sounds together in interesting ways. I'll just want to find a flow. So much of my writing is stopping and speaking it out loud. Like I read everything back to myself out loud so that I can test the actual flow and cadence of a story. And names are a huge part of that. If you were to like be a fly on the wall of my house when I'm trying to come up with names, it's literally me wandering around the house just like saying the names over and over again to test the way they feel.
Excellent. And I'm glad someone asked that question. I've always wondered that myself. Sophina wants to know, and you kind of touched upon this before, do you have a strict writing routine to keep you on track?
I mean, yes, but I try really hard. I have a routine, but I don't have a ritual. Like a lot of authors will have like, the light needs to be this way. I need to have this cup. I need to have this snack. And as someone who usually travels so much for work, those rituals quickly become excuses, like not to work. Oh, I don't have the light. I don't have the cup. I don't have the snacks. So I try really hard to keep the ritual needs to a minimum. I need to have a cup of hot tea. That is like the thing I have to have while I'm writing. I usually have white noise in my ears. That white noise can be like thunderstorm. It can be static. It can be an ambient track. I use an app on my phone called Forest, which helps for like a Pomodoro method where you like set the tree to grow for 25 minutes and then it tells you when you're done. And what I like about the Forest app is it also has sound functions. So while I do 15-minute sprints, and while the 15 minutes are going, I can pick like Paris coffee shop, rain sounds, like whatever it is. I have trained myself in a Pavlovian way that when that sound starts, my focus needs to narrow down to the page. And because, as you've been able to tell so far, I'm sure, I've really cadence-based and like linguistic-based. I can't listen to music that has lyrics in it when I'm actually writing, but I can when I'm brainstorming. The most important thing I found for me is that if I don't write in the morning, I'm not going to write in the day. Like I have to kind of crack that seal for myself before lunchtime, or I'm gonna lose the will to do it in the afternoon. My brain will start being like, let's just try again tomorrow. So usually I try and do the bulk of my work before lunch. Then lunch is like a really nice way to step away, go for a walk, get some food, watch a TV show, and then I go back for a little while in the afternoon. But I want that little while in the afternoon to really be like a flourish, not the bulk of the work. So a lot of it though, I have friends who are 100% opposite from that. In fact, I created an interview series in the early months of the pandemic called No Right Way. And like the entire point was to interview successful author friends whose creative process was completely different to mine. Proof that there is no right way to write. So these are just things which work for me because I'm an incredibly neurotic and anxious person, and I need to be able, because there's no office, because I don't check out at the end of the day, because I don't have the physical separation, I have to find ways to create that sense of liberty so I can put it down at the end of the day and feel satisfied enough to enjoy my evening.
Okay, so I think I'll take the next one from the Q&A. Oh wait, or were you going through the chat? Now I'm like losing it,
Yeah,
Megan.
I was gonna take the next from the chat.
And then I'll go to Q&A. Go for it.
Okay, awesome. So Kataki says, hello, are colors black, white, and red your favorite, or is it coincidence that almost all your book covers have shades of those colors?
Look, I just want to say that I came first. I don't know, so everyone's like, do you dress like your book colors? And I'm like, this has been my color palette for decades. So it started very organically. Yes, I really enjoy the colors, red, black, and white. And then somewhere around the second Shades of Magic book, it kind of became color coding. And ever since then, I love it because it means that if you go into a bookstore, you can see which books are mine. Like you can see my section because it's extremely color coded. But I did come first. So I just want to take credit for that. But no, I wear all black. This is basically as much color as it gets in the white tracery. It's just my comfortable color. I hit 30 and I realized that I was putting color in my wardrobe just so that if someone came over, they would see color in my wardrobe. And then I just decided to embrace it. I love wearing black. And again, as someone who travels for work, it makes everything match, which is real great for me. I also just feel most comfortable in it. Yeah, I think like when I need to pick 3 colors, those are the 3 colors that come to me first. So they've become a kind of shorthand for my work, and I try to make sure that something always is cued to them. But these days, I really love that all of my covers match me.
That's awesome. You're like on brand all the time.
All the time, inadvertently.
So Melissa would like to know, or says, I remember you talked about forgetting the passion you had for writing, and the more you were more relieved at the feeling of being done. I know every writer has different motivations, but I can't imagine writing without some sort of passion for my story. How did you manage to write your stories and finish them when that feeling of passion wasn't there?
So this is a really important difference. I always had passion for the stories themselves. I didn't have passion for the act of first drafting. I'm an incredibly perfectionistic writer. I revise as I go, like to my best attempt. And because first drafting is an exercise in imperfection, it's an exercise in like controlled failure. You are putting something down on paper, which is the farthest thing from the idea in your head. And the act of revision is the act of like decreasing the gap between the idea and the product. It is only the love of my stories and my ideas which gets me through the draft in the first place. So what happened was I had such an existential dread about the act of writing something imperfect that I wasn't enjoying that part of the process. I would find my love back to the story in revision as the story began to more closely resemble the idea that had been in my head in the beginning. I still have a very antagonistic relationship with first drafting, I'm not gonna lie. But what I've tried to do is build enough time in my schedule that I can enjoy the simple act of wordplay in each scene, and I can enjoy the act of laying those bricks down. So I built time. Before, it was like, not only did I hate the imperfection of a first draft, but I was on such a tight deadline that I just had to suffer through it. So it's really been an act of like rediscovering an enjoyment in the first draft. But it was never that I didn't love the act of the story. It was the act of transcription, initial transcription of the story, laying the foundation that was like, and is to an extent, super, super challenging for me. It's really hard for me not to lose faith. I think a huge amount of time my editor and my agent and my friends and my family spend just trying to get me to like not hold down a delete key in a first draft is like less about the story. I think if I didn't love the story so much, I wouldn't suffer through the first draft.
That's awesome. Thank you. Our next question's from Miri. Hey, writer question. Could you please talk about figuring out whether a story
we actually got this
Oh,
one
we did
in the
that. We
Q&A.
just-
Yes, sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Who's next?
Yeah. Megan, you can grab the next one after Mary's in the chat, because we got her in the Q&A.
Okay, got it.
Okay, I'll take one. Hang on a second. Let's see. The next one.
You can have a kitten break. Well, it's like a
yeah,
Jeopardy.
kitten breaks are good. I love the way. Okay, we have somebody. I love the way of thinking of your standalones. I'm a big fan of Addie Larue too, so I can definitely understand that hunger. I want you to know I read random pages of Addie Larue every day, and they all make me smile.
That makes me so happy, especially because Addie was such an act of love, but it was also, I wrote every chapter in Addie Larue out of order, so I treated every chapter like a tiny little piece of art unto itself. So that makes me really happy.
Okay, we have a question from Adam. How do you know that your story ideas are worth of your time and effort? As a person who tried to write some stories, I sometimes just can't think of any way how to continue. Yes, I love all your work.
Okay, so this comes back probably to a process question. And, you know, I'm going to use another metaphor. I'm sorry. So I talked about like making a meal out of my stories. And the way that I think about it often is that like my brain is a 6-burner stove, and my ideas are on different like burners. And the way that I know a story is worth telling is that I don't start writing it right when I have the idea. Like, I gather pieces of the idea over time, and I let them steep in the pots, and I make them wait, sometimes a month, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year. And what I'm really testing to see if my excitement fades. As I gather more ingredients for the story, as I gather the voice and the conflict and the characters and the ending, because again, the ending is a really important trick there in terms of testing your excitement for writing the story, like to push all the way to the end, because the vast majority of writers start things and simply jump to another thing and to another thing and to another thing and never finish anything. But I am always kind of making my ideas sit so that, and as I gather all the pieces I need for it, so that by the time I make the active decision to write the story, I not only know that I have the excitement that will sustain me for the process, but I also know that I have enough pieces of the story that it won't lose shape. I know I have enough plot. I know I have an ending that excites me and is going to push me through. I know I have the voice. I know I have the conflict. So a lot of it is like being patient. I think often we rush into ideas. And so I don't have any trunked novels. I don't have any novels that I've started writing and then abandoned, because I don't let them get to that stage. I have a lot of ideas that have not become novels, but I don't have a lot of novels that I've started and not finished, because I make them wait until I make sure I have enough of it.
We're actually getting close to the end, and I want to make sure we get in as many questions as possible. So I'm going to just ask 2 from the Q&A. One is Taibo wants to know best writing advice you've ever heard and tips for new writers. Also, I love all your books. And Camille wants to know what your favorite scene or character from Gallant was and why.
Ooh, I'll start with that one because it's easier. And I'm going to say it in a spoiler-free way. There is a scene in a ballroom with people dancing. And I looked forward to writing it. Is one of the most visual moments in the book. It doesn't sound that fancy, but everyone's dead. And like, it just makes me so happy. Like, everything about that scene, like, I want this to become a TV show just so I can see that scene come to life on screen. That was a scene that like I knew I was going to write, because I outlined. So I had the shape of it and I could not wait to write it. The first question there, sorry, can you repeat the first question? My brain has gone civvy.
Tips for beginners.
Yes. Okay. Again, you're going to hear me like a broken record. Come up with an ending. Seriously, come up with an ending that's not just a placeholder ending. It's an ending that excites you so much that on good days you can't wait to reach it, and on bad days you won't quit. The only other advice that I have is like for those who are anxious-minded people, like truly do not think of it as writing a book. Like, sit down and break it down into the smallest bites possible. Like, I write for 15 minutes at a time. Some days when I'm really stressed out or it feels too much, I write for 10 or 5. Like, some days it's just about keeping the creative door propped open in your head. But like, it is not about how many words you write. It's just about the fact that you don't quit writing.
Awesome. I have a comment and a question. The comment's from Myra. Vicious is my favorite book. It's such a beautiful story, so it's really interesting that it meant so much to you. And our question from Antonella. Hi, honestly, I haven't read Gallant. I haven't had a chance to buy it, but I would love to know, when you were writing it, what were the most present feelings in it all around?
Ooh. I think loneliness. I think loneliness was like, and this makes it sound like a really sad book. Like, there's a lot of hope and a lot of like power and passion in it too. But like, I really wanted to write about like who we are when all we have is ourself. You know, like, it's just literally about a mirror. It's like not who you are in the context of other people, not who you are in the context of family or friends, but like, who are you when you are alone in an empty house?
Awesome. Let's see. We had a question, tips on writing faster and completing novels, which I know we touched upon. So the next question, are there any authors who inspire you?
I mean, so many authors inspire me. Probably for anyone who follows me online will know that like Neil Gaiman is a huge inspiration. I met him very early on in my career, and he's gone on to be like a friend and mentor, and is like one of the most genuine and authentic people. I think I was really inspired not only by Neil's work, which to me feels like being read to by my mom, that my mom and Neil are from kind of the same area of England. And so listening to his books makes me feel like my mom is reading to me. There's an intimacy to the magic and to you feel like it's a whispered story, not a shout. And so that's always inspired me. But also just like the way that he has comported himself with fame. I think that like that I think when you meet a hero who is that famous and who is that kind, it makes you realize that no one has an excuse to be rude. And so definitely an inspiration. I have many. I would say Holly Black and Susanna Clark are way up there, as well as Donna Tartt, as well as Garth Nix, as well as, I mean, the list goes on, and I'm always trying to find new ones. I mean, one of the things about how much I read is that I'm not just reading things I know I'll love. For every book that I'm confident I'll love, I pick up two that I have no idea if they're for me. And that's how you discover new loves. That's how you discover new favorites. I think we become very risk averse, but like picking up a book from your library or a bookstore that you have no idea if you'll love it is like one of the most fraught and most like full of potential things you can do. So I always challenge people who are trying to expand their readership to like pick up things you have no idea if you'll like.
Okay, awesome. Julia would like to know, how does the process of having sensitivity readers work?
So I'm lucky enough that I go through my publisher. So as a traditionally published author, my editor at Harper worked with me to find experts in the field that I was in. There are resources online to be sure, but if you are traditionally published, it's usually a thing that the publishers can help connect you with, which is really, really great. I built a lot of time into the schedule for it. That's a thing you have to be mindful of, is we made sure that there would be ample time for sensitivity readers to sit with the work so that they themselves weren't rushed. But yeah, my publisher helped me.
We're pretty much almost out of time. I know.
I will be with Chauncey as we end. Hold on.
Yeah, which is funny. By the way, my cats are named after Neil Gaiman's Good Omens characters.
Oh, amazing.
So let's see. Myra wants to know, what are you reading right now, and do any of the stories you read influence the books you're writing at the time?
They don't, but I'm also extremely mindful that like, so I'm entered a point in this first draft that I'm writing right now where it extremely limits the kind of fiction that I can read, because I don't want anything that kind of like cross-pollinates. I like that cross-pollination when I'm between drafts, but when the book is taking up so much space in my own head, it's really hard to have other voices. So I'll tend to read a lot of nonfiction. I'm currently reading a nonfiction called Chatter, which is about like the intelligence community, done by the same guy who did Empire of Pain, who's a really amazing nonfiction writer. And I most recently read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, which is one of the best books I have read in years. Like, not an easy read, not a gentle read, but such an incredible one. So, and I'm now reading The Maid. I tend to pick things which have like no risk of like, they have to be so different from what I'm writing so as not to like kind of rattle me. Especially I have like 10 chapters left in my book, and so I'm like just trying to get through it.
Do we have time for one more, Megan?
Okay, well, Corinne just wants to thank you for her books. Vicious is her favorite book, and she just wants to thank you. She loves your characters, and they've connected with her in such a personal way. And Hannah writes, will you ever teach writing? You share so much of your knowledge via social media, no right way, but do you have plans for classes or any other intentional teaching course?
No, I like keeping it informal, and I'm also afraid that if I like put it down on paper, then people will just think I just repeat myself all the time. I really only have like 5 pieces of wisdom, so I just like to share it in the context. I think it feels more personal that way. But I mean, never say never, right? But right now, it's like this is pretty much the extent of anytime like anyone can do a chat with me. I'm like, that's part of like teaching. Like this has been an education. I feel like we've been able to chat craft and have cats. Like that's so much better.
We have so many comments, thank you for your stories. Someone says Lila Bard is their favorite character ever. Someone says that they think about Holland a lot, and I do too. Like I find myself thinking about Holland at weird times, and I'm like, yeah, Holland was a character.
Holland was my favorite.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize to everybody whose questions and comments we didn't get to, but thank you so much on behalf of Syosset Library to VE Victoria Schwab. Just a note, if you happen to be in the New York area, or if you want to support a specific local bookshop, we do have signed copies of Gallant over at Theodore's Books at in Oyster Bay. So you can either call them or go in if you're local, or email Peggy at theodoresbooks.com to get signed copies of Gallant. And your cat is so spoiled.
He's just living this great life right now. This is the most docile I've ever seen him.
I like just want to pet.
He's so sweet.
He is spoiled rotten. That's the
Megan, anything else?
Just so you know,
go ahead.
The other cat is inside the chair right now. Thomas has climbed up through the bottom of the chair and is inside of it. So
yeah, that's like my Crowley is a scaredy cat, which you would think with his name he'd be the opposite, but his sister got that personality. He lived in our box spring the first few months of his life.
Oh goodness. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria. I just wanted to say your books are a gem in the writing world. Like you add something so creative, and like everyone should check out your books because they're awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. And on behalf of Syosset Library, to all of you who came, thank you. Please continue to check our social media, trending at syossetlibrary.org. We'll often post things on for NaNoWriMo, which is why we get a lot of great writer questions. And all of our virtual events are free and open to all. So I'll hopefully see everybody very, very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.